We are up.
Okay, good morning everyone, and I'm glad to see that we have like over 40 people here. It's really quite amazing. All right, but so crank up your brains and let's get going. And I really have a lot of things to talk about. That's rather unusual, isn't it? But I want to start with this thing from my little book. Do you have copies of that? Might be interesting to follow along. And since there are no page numbers in it, it is from the preface, and it's about 6 pages in. But you can follow along with my reading or whatever. And it goes on and on, you know how I write. It is plausible to assume that a thorough investigation of the musical generating principles of consonance and dissonance viewed from the technical perspective of species counterpoint, we can be led to surprising insights necessary for the formulation of a general theory of music. Music, like language, is obviously an extremely complex system. And because it is a complex system, it bears the hallmark of all organisms. Organisms are complex systems. They have to be looked at that way. Music theory must attempt to reduce this complexity to manageable proportions by the construction of a system of levels, each of which makes a certain descriptive apparatus available for the characterization of musical structure. A music theory constructed in such a manner can then be evaluated as adequate by determining grammars so formed by the theory that meet certain conditions of simplicity, as well as offer explanation on formal grounds for the intuitions of the musician. When developed along rational lines, avoiding unsupported assumptions and placing aside the authority of received notions, that is dogma, the connections between music and language in the generative sense appear incontrovertible and uncontentious. At present, no explanation for the sudden appearance of either language or music in evolutionary time can be convincingly shown. But growth and development of these uniquely human capacities, in the sense of change over time, can be shown for both. In Western contrapuntal polyphony, a process of experimentation, selection, and synthesis can be clearly postulated, which has allowed music to exploit a range of innate cognitive properties that give Western contrapuntal polyphony its specific characteristics and mode of externalization. Also, the distinct natural music of other world cultures can readily be used to evaluate and test our claims for a universal grammar of music. And by universal grammar, and this is the important statement, and by the universal grammar of music, we mean the sense in which that term is used as it refers to the theory of the biological or genetic property or component of a musical faculty. If one can make such a claim, this is different, as it has been pointed out by others, from musical universals, which would be a list of the things one would find common to all music or languages. One would suspect, if there were such universal principles of organization, like the universal grammar of music, like language, all cultures representing behavior common to human beings would share these properties, whether or not a particular culture realized all of the inherent potential features of this biologically, genetically endowed capacity. Wow. That's a rather startling statement, I think. You get the gist of that? You understand what I'm trying to get at through this? Okay, well, I'll approach it this way this morning. Somebody tell me the history of printing. As a little boy in Mrs. Rockmore's, have I told you this story before? If I have, please indulge me, I'll tell it again. As a little boy in Mrs. Rockmore's 5th grade class, Mrs. Rockmore was one of my favorite teachers because she let me do whatever I wanted to do. And it was very interesting. Among my projects in the 5th grade was to build an airplane that didn't crash, and then to build a houseboat so that we could take out to the Avondale Lake and ride around in it. And then my other project was, as a little boy, I was obsessed with printing and printing presses and the nature of printing. You get a general idea of me, right? So I had this thing, you know, at that time in the 50s, the main printing process or duplication process was something called the Spirit process or ditto machines. And it was a process whereby carbon on a master, which was, you know, you could type on it or write on the carbon and it would imprint on a master. And then that master was put on a cylinder, and somehow the ink was made to transfer from the master to the paper. Well, I'd seen those machines do that many times in the office. You know, that's another thing. I actually thought I was the principal of the school, so I spent a lot of time in the office. But I thought that machine was fascinating, and I wanted to know how it was, right? And I just loved things that, you know, printing. Well, and I loved books. Mrs. Rockmore decided that since I was whatever I was in the classroom, she would allow me to explore some of my fantasies. And so I organized a library in the back of the classroom, and it was a multimedia library. It had film strips in it, and it had books, and it had magazines, and she allowed me, miraculously, to sit in the back of the room running this little library. And of course it was a covert operation for me to explore the properties of printing. So I made a little printing press to the best of my ability, and I started experimenting with the Spirit process. And at first I thought, well, maybe the fluid that deposited the carbon onto the paper was somehow used to moisten the master itself. Well, I experimented with that, and all I got was a bunch of running mess, right? The purple stuff ran all over the thing, and you couldn't get any print. I tried that 2 or 3 different times, you know, trying to moisten the master with a little less fluid, but every time I did that, the ink would run all over the place. Then it dawned on me, after about 6 months, no, after about 30 minutes, that it wasn't the master that was moistened, it was the paper. And so I began to moisten the paper with the fluid, and lo and behold, the more fluid I put on the paper, the less distinct the printing was. And I finally decided that if the paper were just barely moistened and put right through the machine as it passed through, an accurate image came off. What is the history of printing? Anybody know anything about the history of printing?
Johannes Gutenberg.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was Johannes Gutenberg's dates?
16 something.
He had many dates. I think he was also married. What?
Did he invent the press in like 1680 something? 87?
Bach was born in 1685.
Yes.
When was the Protestant Reformation?
15.
In the 1500s, yes. What was one of the things that spurred the Protestant Reformation in Germany?
The printing press.
The printing press. When was the printing press? When?
Oh wow, this guy lived a while ago.
Yes, he did. In what century?
15.
Yes. And what music are we studying that is a product of the 15th century?
Bach.
Dufay.
Right, and also today, Josquin des Prez. And what period is this? The 15th and the 16th century? Actually goes really back to the 14th century, the late 1300s. The Renaissance. This is called a fantasy on a theme of printing, right? When was Giotto alive? You know who Giotto was?
He was in the 1400s.
Can you spell that?
Giotto.
Oh. And all I got was jet assisted takeoff. Giotto di Bondone.
When were his dates? Giotto.
1270 to 1337.
What?
1270 to 1337.
Yeah, 1337, right? Okay, what is he noted for?
Frescoes.
Frescoes, and he's also noted for something more than that. It's a breakaway from medieval flatness or iconography. What? Mm-hmm.
Giotto. Oh, okay.
Giotto
Okay.
or gelato.
Yes.
What? What was he noted for?
Was he part of the what's it called? Perspective.
Giotto.
He was before perspective, though, wasn't he, or did he help to create that?
Perspective,
Okay.
right? Perspective. The beginning of the resurgence of perspective. Giotto did not invent perspective. You find perspective in the wall paintings, those that still exist. Where?
Italy.
And when?
When?
In classical antiquity. Well, what part of classical antiquity? Okay, well that's for you to find out. Let's get back to the printing. So Gutenberg was what was his dates?
1400 to 1468.
1400 to
1468.
68.
Yeah.
Okay. When is the date that he is credited with the invention of printing?
1439.
Okay. And actually, more accurately, that should be phrased as not the invention of printing, but the invention of printing from movable type. Right? And the movable type was what? Made out of what?
Metal.
Metal. Yes. And it's something that swept through Europe and immediately began the kind of renaissance in literacy in a certain way, because you could print multiple copies of the same thing. Now, in this particular age, where Western culture didn't invent anything, right? Printing is generally attributed to what culture?
Chinese.
Chinese. Right? And when was that?
Give me a moment.
It's really old.
1313?
What?
220?
No.
868.
PC.
Does it say?
Woodblock?
Yes, woodblock printing.
Earliest surviving examples from China date to about 220.
Yes, okay.
Like 220.
That's accurate.
AD.
AD, yes, that's accurate. That's about right. Woodblock. What is a woodblock?
Percussion instrument that you hit.
Yes, right. You kind of reverse carve the image into the woodblock, and then you put ink on it and stamp the paper, or the paper is stamped into it, right? Then the advancement of that, some people figured out, well, wow, you can use an individual symbol on a little block, and you can use that to print letters or text, right? And then somebody invented the idea that, well, you could make those little images or characters out of clay or wood or whatever. Then you could line them up and set a kind of primitive type, and then you could print something like that. Well, yes, in Chinese culture, you can say that that was a form of printing, and the Chinese developed or invented printing. But the printing from movable type, which could accommodate multiple copies out of the same setup, was Gutenberg, a Western development. Somebody look up coevolution, unless you already know what that is. I want a precise definition for coevolution.
The influence of closely associated species on each other in their evolution.
Where does that, is that from Wikipedia?
Google. In biology, coevolution occurs when two or more species reciprocally affect each other's evolution.
Is that Wikipedia?
That's Wikipedia. Berkeley. Coevolution. The term coevolution is used to describe cases where two or more species reciprocally affect each other's evolution. So, for example, an evolutionary change in the morphology of a plant might affect the morphology of an herbivore that eats the plant, which talks about the cyclicism of it after. That's Berkeley. The UC, not the Boston Music School.
All right. Well, what is convergent evolution? Or convergent, excuse me, convergent evolution.
In evolutionary biology, convergent evolution is the process whereby organisms not closely related independently evolve similar traits as a result of having to adapt to similar environments or ecological niches.
All right. So, what is the difference between coevolution and convergent evolution?
One is symbiotic, the other is independent.
Right. That's basically it. All right. Now, those terms specifically apply to the evolution of species or biological forms, right? So it could mean that the evolution of certain characteristics that you find in different organisms were evolved at different times, but in similar ways. Yes? All right. Now, many people have tried to apply, and this I think is quite shaky. There might be some validity in it, and apparently a lot of people think that there is. But I, being the skeptic that I am, I'm not so certain. A lot of people try to apply those biological properties, coevolution and convergent evolution, to social phenomena or cultural phenomena. What do you think about doing that? What do you think about the idea of coevolution and convergent evolution if you're talking about culture? Does culture evolve?
Not in the literal sense. Probably, yeah.
Define evolve.
What?
Define evolve. Change over time, yes.
No. Yes, okay.
Culture
If
does
evolution
change
is
over
not,
time.
evolution is not change over time. Change over time may be reflected in the evolutionary process, but that is not the engine of evolution.
Well, cultures do not have reproductive systems with small genetic mutations over time that change the way they function over a grand scale. So no, cultures don't evolve in that sense.
Right,
But
in that
more-
sense.
More figuratively.
So
they
culture
do.
do not evolve in the biological sense.
Well, cultures don't have biology.
Exactly. Okay, there we go. Bam! Right? Cultures do not have biology. Biological creatures
Unless you're
embody
talking about
culture,
bacteria
yes,
cultures.
Oh,
or
yeah.
some do. Yeah.
What's that?
What did you say?
Well, I said unless you're talking about bacteria cultures.
Yes, which might outstrip us all. Yes. There is strep throat. No.
I think you were thinking of outstrep us all.
At any rate, is the point taken? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And I think that and that goes back to a statement that I made in my book. You know, cultures come up with the same ideas frequently, but is that the same as convergent evolution? No, we've just established that apparently it isn't. Well, so what is the similarity? Why is it that people are willing to transfer that concept to culture?
Because figuratively it works out really well. There are a lot of things.
I don't, but figuratively is another word for metaphor,
Yes.
right? But a metaphor is not a, you know, I don't know whether it carries that much weight. It might carry that weight in a kind of psychological or aesthetic sense, not really, but maybe, but not in a scientific sense.
Well, scientific languages have never evolved, but the terminology is still used in a very widespread fashion. So.
But it's not accurate.
So. It's
Well,
not
I
like
think
it's
that's
not
a
like we
problem
store-
with it.
I mean, when we store the word evolution in our head, you know, as an abstract symbol, we don't store the exact definition of it. We store the sense that it gives us, and that's why we can apply it to so many different things that don't literally apply it to what it means.
Right, and you have just hit on one of the basic themes that I always try to come back to. There's a difference between the mechanical nature of thought, that process of thought, and the psychological aspects of thought, which use the same mechanisms, but which attribute to the psychological thought an actuality that's basically illusory. But those concepts are treated as real. So it all boils down to the fact that the mind is not a reliable guide to actuality. It creates reality and it creates thingness. And so that means that you really don't see and you really don't hear. What you are doing is that you have these sensations that are abstracted from the properties of light and sound, however you want to define that, and that is the mechanism that is used for you to negotiate the world. And so the mind deals with percepts, and because they are percepts, and there is this division in thought between the mechanical aspect of thought and the psychological property of thought, this is where your explanation just comes in. So I think that it is inappropriate if you're trying to investigate some kind of specific terminology. In science, the terms have to be defined specifically. This is a problem with the nature of language in general. And it's one of the problems that Wittgenstein spent his entire life trying to figure out. The Tractatus, which is really the only book that he ever wrote, was early, was concentrated on the nature of language as a formal system. Later on, he began to explore how language was a property of culture. And I think his later writings, many people misinterpret, because it's not a reversal of his idea of language as a kind of formal or logical system, but it is an addendum to that. Well, that leads us to this rage now about adapting the biogenetic principles to cultural phenomena. Okay, all right, well, in a certain sense, that's not implausible. But the thing is that you have to recognize that the human mind works as a human mind. It doesn't matter whether you're from China or Finland or Timbuktu or Tasmania. Where is Tasmania? Anybody know where Tasmania is?
Yeah.
Where is it?
On the Australian continent?
Yes, okay. You think everybody knows that? I don't know. So do you get my point? And naturally, if the human mind or brain evolved the way that it did, and it did evolve, right? It's going to be able to create these parallel structures rooted in thought, yes? So naturally, if the Chinese presumably invented printing, the development of printing in the West could be explained as a what? In evolutionary terms.
Co- or convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution.
Is it necessary?
But that's loose, that's a loose term, and it really can't be applied that way. Why?
Because it's not biological.
No, it's not biological, except it is. Why is it biological?
Because sociology is just applied biology.
Because the Chinese have the same brain as Gutenberg.
Oh.
Yes? Right, so it would appear to me that the search for these connections should be rooted squarely in asking the questions. What is the significance of human biology? What is specific about the nature of the biology of human beings? And so that question has led me to explore what is the biomusicalistic nature of human beings. Just as Chomsky and the other generativists, beginning with Eric Linneberg at Harvard in the 1950s, asked, what is the biolinguistic property of human beings? Is linguistics, or is language, a biological attribute of human beings? And the answer to that question is ongoing, because it is obviously a product of the human mind, and therefore it must be, as a mental activity, rooted in some way in biology. Is that clear? All right. So I think as long as we keep the terms clear, and as long as we understand the parameters of the discussion, and we're absolutely clear about which area is which, and the fact that we are using this term in the cultural sense in a very loose metaphorical way, we can conduct research like that. But the minute that you apply it whole scale and wholesale as a genuine scientific term, you're in all kinds of trouble, I think. And it will not hold up. Because it leads to what? It doesn't have to. But what does that lead to? And you fantasize about that and assume what it might lead to?
Enlightenment.
Really? Do you think so? No, I don't think so. I think it leads rather to the opposite. Right? It leads to a division between people. Hence the word diversity, which I react really strongly to. there are diverse things. But it's one thing that you should not apply to cultures wholesale. Yes, cultural is some kind of social thing. What is culture anyway? What's an adequate definition of culture?
People living in groups.
Well, it's manifest by people living in groups, yes. So the people living in that group do what?
Live together and create a social code.
Yes, and the social code by living together is what?
That's a good question, actually.
Shared experience.
Shared experience,
Oh.
right? So culture is actually shared knowledge. Well, you think about that, then you get into trouble. Because there are many aspects of culture that is shared across the globe, yes? And that the differences that exist between cultures are extremely superficial. Now, there's something called the Boasian tradition, which I also strongly reject too. And that is that when you explore a culture, you must block out all information about other cultures. And you have to investigate it as though that was like independently existing. Now, do you think from a biological standpoint that would be possible? If you're looking at the mind, the activity of the human brain, do you think that would be possible?
To look at cultures independently, like totally independently?
Yeah.
I think so. If our biology
Absolutely.
if our biology is similarly enough wired, then
If you're looking at them independently without assuming that there's no connection between any other culture.
well, with that assumption of connection, I think that the conclusion will still be that there is quite a bit of connection. But you could.
Well, yes, but you can't then. If there's quite a bit of connection, you can't, because the obvious fact is that human beings are biologically connected, and that it's impossible for one brain, human brain, unless there's some pathological difference or alteration or abnormality in the brain, they're going to be doing essentially the same thing, but not always in the same way. That's one of Schenker's big terms. Always the same, but not necessarily in the same way. All right. Well, I bring up all of these things as a strident plea and a rebuttal to contemporary, what I call flimsy thinking about things, and has a tendency to steer things off track in an age when I think rather the opposite should be happening. And that's just my own personal take on it. And I don't know. When this little scenario got going back in the 90s, actually, the impetus for that was John Brockman's think tank. And it became really obvious to me that it was important to explore all kinds of different ideas in the context of pursuing your own particular line of work, particularly if you're an artist. Well, I will have to say that many of those ideas were strongly rejected in the 90s. And suddenly, in some combination or another, they've become remanifest, not by me, but by others. And I laud and support that. But on the other hand, I think that one needs to think more deeply and more correctly about the nature of transferring things from biology to superficial aspects of cultural difference. because I think ultimately that has the effect of separating and creating an artificial sense of, you know, togetherness. That's just my thought about it. Okay. Well, all right, let's move on. And I did want to take one look at this counterpoint exercise, which we have looked at, I think, before. And I just want to point out a few things that I think are emergent in just this simple counterpoint. Now, can you all see this? Yeah? Okay. Now, I think we might have gone over this in some way, but I'm going to try to do it a little differently. Let's say that you have 7 different pitches diatonically, and that they are going to represent the symbolic tools of music. Just like in language, you would have an alphabet or phonemes or morphemes that represent the primitives of the language. So you have these primitives 1 through 7, and we've decided that the consonant degrees would be 1, 3, 5, and then 6, right? And that the dissonant elements, which create these propositional structures or argument structures, would be 2, 4, and 7. So 2 falls between 1 and 3, 4 falls between 3 and 5, and 7 falls between 6 and 1. Okay? So let's create a vertical representation using numerals to see what's happening here. In the 3-part first species, all vertical arrangements are supposed to be consonants. So give me the figuration here. This is 8, 8, 8. Okay, next 6, 3,
6, 3.
6, 3, 8, 3,
6, 3.
6, 3.
5, 3. 8, 6. 5, 3. 8, 8.
Okay. All right. Now, just 8, right?
Yeah.
And that should be 8. Yeah, because they're unisons. You can say 8, 1 if you want. Okay. All right. Now, these are supposed to be all consonances. And you know from your theory stuff that an 8, 1, a 6, 3, you know, there should be like triadic structures. Okay? All right. Now, in this particular configuration, let's go back and think of the positional, using the numbers. We're thinking about positions within the diatonic system. All right? So this is going to change the significance of these numbers. So what do we have up here? We have 1, 1, or 8. Yeah? 8 meaning 1. Yes? Position in the scale. Then we have what? Degree what? 7, 5, 2. Yes? Then what? 2, 4, 7. And then
1 through 8.
1, 3, 8. I'm depending upon you now. Okay?
7, 2, 5.
7, 2, 5.
4, 1, 6.
These all sound like area codes.
5, 3, 5. 5, 2, 7.
1, 1, 1.
8.
Same
Whatever.
difference.
Okay. Now,
What's 7 numbers 1,
I call this the summation, right? That's just general figured base. I don't call that the same thing.
Wait, why summation?
What?
Why summation?
Because it's a summary of all of these intervals as they
Well-
apply to figure base.
We took the summation.
Intervals above the
we had,
base. What?
1 second, I'm doing a bit of math here. We'd have like 40 something on the top and like 20 something on the
In
bottom.
linguistic theory, the summation is the sentence or the statement. So these are
I hate
representatives
linguists.
of what?
I hate linguists.
Well done.
Co-opting all our good winners.
Okay? All right, so those represent the statement that you see here. All right? Okay, so down here, these numerals represent something totally different. Right? Which one of these formations carries more information in it? This one or this one?
Second one.
The second one down here, right? So we find out that if we strictly look at these intervals, this is a natural consonance, right? This is not. That's some dissonant configuration, yeah? And so is this. What about this? What's that number?
That's 3.
3?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is this a consonance?
Yes.
It looks like it. What about this?
No.
No. What about this?
No.
No. That?
Yes.
Yes. This?
No.
No. And this. Okay. Well, I think that that is not exactly right. Because there are two consonances here, two dissonances here, and then there's a consonance, and then two more dissonances. Then consonant, dissonant, consonant. That looks right. Yeah? Okay. Well, there's something strange going on here. And by looking at these numerals, you begin to figure out what that might be. Look, what is the relationship of these two sonorities?
Voice exchange.
Yes,
That's
this
excellent.
changes places with that. And then something else happens in here, right? So these are one sound. What about this? Let's skip that. Do you have, in continuing here, any relationship between these and anything else that's continuing here?
Probably. There's
We've got the exchange of the 2 and the 7, right? Okay? Do you see anything else that might connect the 2 and the 7?
and there are more 2s and 7s.
Here, yes?
And then the penultimate part.
This looks like that, right?
Mm.
Okay? Isn't that a 2
Yes.
and a 7? All right, well now let's go back up here and look at this. Using aspects of Schenkerian notation, we can try to figure out what this is doing. All right, well, this is obviously a consonance, yeah? But we notice that in this sonority, we've got that, and then immediately that exchanges place, right? But what's happening on the inside of that sonority? Here.
6 to 5.
It is a 6 to 5. Now, it's very interesting that if you take the cantus firmus by itself, this is part of the fundamental, yeah? The counterpoint below and above are reinterpreting that note. That note no longer has a significance in the boundary interval of this. It's reinterpreted inside of this particular sonority, which in itself is dissonant. But because of the principles of vertical consonance, it has every single thing in here must be a consonance. So already this is imitating this. All right, let's continue. Now, do you see any other relationship that might exist between this sonority and that sonority?
Mhm.
This note
The
moves
second
back
part,
down to
yes,
this.
96.
And so that note is there, right? Okay? This note moves into that position. Yeah? But if this were not there, you would see the logical connection, the extended connection. That, right? So it's fairly clear, at least I think it is, that these are connected. So this sonority, this 4-note sonority, is expanded, right? And it's actually doing what the whole thing is doing. So it represents a kind of recursion. The people that are dealing with music cognition have just discovered that these effects actually exist in music. This is one of the basic ideas in my own theory, and I'm trying to discover where it comes from. What makes it do this? What aspect of the mind in dealing with discrete pitch permits this kind of thing to happen? What kind of computation permits this? Manipulation of symbols. And it creates a kind of recursively enumerable process that obviously is an aspect of musical structure and linguistic structure. Okay, so if this is one sound, what does it do to this sonority?
It's a fussy.
It turns this into a dissonance. This is a dissonance inside of this transformed consonance. So these two sonorities are not the same, right? This is a genuine consonance. This is a dissonance reinterpreted by the consonant status of this dissonant sonority. No one, to my knowledge, has recognized this until recently, right? Now, so if that is true, then that's some kind of a passing tone that has to go somewhere, all right? Now, we hit this thing, and this is some kind of a problem. Have we discussed this before? I don't think we ever got to this. Right? I'm not sure. If we did, I think probably you don't remember, right? Now, if the basic idea is the formation is that you have to have this, right? That this is, the passing tone is the relationship between these two elements and the conditioning third. We also saw that essentially this can be expressed this way or this way. They are the same. They are symmetrical, right? This is some kind of symmetry. Yeah? What is it that breaks that symmetry? It's specific properties of linearization. Once you set it moving through time, you break this symmetry. So it becomes anisotropic, right? Okay. Now, what's the interesting thing about this?
It's a C.
Apply this to this. What is the nature of the voice exchange?
An exchange of voices.
Yes, that's very perceptive.
Thank you. There's the passing tone in the middle.
Yeah,
It can go both ways. It
Yeah.
happens both ways at the same time.
and in fact it does. It goes both ways at the same time. So what is the effect of a group or sonority that's prolonged and involved in a voice exchange? Does it like plunge ahead? What does it do in a rhythmic context? Yes, it stops, right? That's the whole point behind the idea of prolongation. And it's something that's embedded in a very elementary way in this. You also see it in a certain sense in just the cantus firmus itself. It's bound to be there, right? Okay, so the rhythm is delayed, not retarded, but delayed by this, right? Technique. It's an interesting phenomenon. This is a problem. So actually we can say that we have consonance, dissonance. We're supposed to have a consonance next, yes? But this is really what? It looks like what? The dissonance. All right? Well, there's some trick going on here.
Well, there are two consonant pitches in it.
What?
There are two consonant pitches in that sonority.
Yep. But this is a dissonance. and it looks like there's a gap here, yeah? And, well, so what might be an explanation of this? Remember that this E is transferred here and it's going down there, right? Okay. How do we get this note?
5 to 6.
Over what?
B flat.
Yes, 5 to 6 over B flat. So it's actually the B flat. And my notation is this. That's not there, but it's necessary for the correct interpretation of that sonority. Right? Okay. And the actual voice leading certainly permits that. So this is unpronounced. You have this. So within this sonority, you have consonance, dissonance, right? And then the next sonority is consonant, right? This sonority is dissonant, and the final sonority is consonant. Okay? All right. Now, that's an interesting thing, and it opens up many questions. The first question is, can that really be happening? And does it happen in other structures? Can you observe things like this happening that can have this description or this explanation? And does it fit the theory of consonance and dissonance, the specific or absolute value of the relationship of consonance and dissonance? I think that it does. And I think these things go on like this all the time. And it's one of the things that contributes to, in this case, to the surface perception of this simple little three-part species. And because the cantus firmus is on the inner voice, it's reinterpreting a number of these pitches. And what is it that's reinterpreting those pitches? It's the relationship of the two outer voices. So we can make another observation. Maybe it's the outer voices that provide the controlling factors in linearization, that how you proceed in time through those relationships. And it groups the tones in a kind of hierarchical relationship. I believe that is true. I've done all this without mentioning other spurious aspects. Okay, now I would like for us to look at the Josquin-Desprez example.
B or
No.
C?
Let's do the C.
I will see you at 2. I just have a lesson now, so.
At 2? Okay.
But I will see you for a lesson at 2.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
thank
great.
you.
All right.
That's the one without the follow-along score, right?
What?
The one without the score.
Michael Eliason.
No, the one with the score.
Okay.
Okay. But, I would prefer, first of all, that you don't look at the music. And so you have to shut your eyes after you turn it on. Okay?
Very well.
All right, pause it for just a minute. We started where? You think that's the tonic?
We started with a me anyways.
Mm-hmm. Well, one pitch, you can't tell anything from one pitch. Let's start again, play it again. That's a fifth, right? A and E, wait, back up. right? Yeah.
Fifth, all right. Keep going.
Yeah. Stop. Okay? So, what has happened so far?
6 to 5.
I don't need to erase this. I can just go on, right? Let's say it does that, right? Which it does, right? Okay? And then, what happens?
We got a lot.
Well, no, I think I'm going to go down here.
Law comes in.
Well, how does it get to the A?
It just comes in.
Comes in like that, yes? Okay? And then what happens? Play it again. Stop. Right? La, si, la. Right? With that? Then what's the next note here?
Do.
So la do
Re to what?
to so. Then la to do.
Well, yeah, let me put this down and I can. Does this go back to the E?
Re so la do. Re and so happen together with the B, and then la do happen with the la again.
What goes here?
Re sol, and then lining up with the next la is la do.
There you go. Okay. So this is like a what? Like a 6/3, yes? Okay, and this would be like a 5/3 if you connect that. So that's just 5. And that is 5 to 6, yeah? Okay. So far we've got it going fairly well. All right, play it again. Okay, what happens after this?
So the parallel tense. So la, si, si, la, do.
There's a C here, right? Then this goes up to E.
Yeah.
How strange. Okay. And what's on the top here?
Mi, re, do, si, do.
Hmm. All right. Let's listen to it one more time. This is wrong. Did I do this wrong?
I think it's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next voice comes in and recaptures this E, yeah? Okay, well, this is the Panjalingua Mass. It's the Kyrie on the famous, I think it's Maundy Thursday hymn, right? And the chant is actually designated as Phrygian mode, so it would be E, right? Okay, well, a lot of things have happened since Dufay. First of all, the rhythmic organization is much clearer, and you have pretty much vertical sonorities that line up without the constant shifting relationship of 2 against 3, but where the prolation is really the same, which you saw in the fixed voice of the Dufay Mass, right? We said that the tempus was imperfect, but the prolation was perfect. And that creates the possibility of having 2 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 2 in the other voices. So the technique that was used in the Dufay example is much more related to older isorhythmic techniques. The fixed voice appears in a single voice and it is repeated in either rhythmic diminution or augmentation. This doesn't do that. It uses the borrowed material in a completely different way. There's no tenor voice as such. The chant is used as a basis for melodic generation or motivic generation. This is called a paraphrase mass. It paraphrases a pre-existing chant, but it does not use the old cantus firmus technique as a structuring voice. Those things have gone by the way. This represents an incredible step forward. And it's just a matter of, well, this is a late mass of Dupré, but there's no more than like 50 years, 45 years between those 2 pieces. The Dufay Mass is in the 50s, 1450s, and so Josquin de Prez was early part of the 16th century. This Mass is from like, I think 1516 or something like that. Okay, so how is this a Phrygian melody?
Upper neighbor of the first note.
Mi, fa, mi, re, mi, sol, la, do. Yeah? Okay, so because it is, because it has that half step, and the chant begins and ends on a mi, and it has the half step F, it's considered Phrygian. But there's a problem with the Phrygian mode. If you consider the dominant or the reciting tone of the mode to be the boundary interval, B, that creates vertically a big problem. Yeah?
Very diminished.
Because the fifth of the fifth is diminished, right? So what is the reciting tone or the dominant in the Phrygian mode?
A. C.
C. That's why the arch of this particular chant moves to C. And so in doing so, something strange happens. And it's something that Josquin de Prez recognizes. The melody is not, look, you know this instantly. Now if I were to play this, that's not an E, right? That's here. Yes? Well, Dupré recognizes that. Not Marcel Dupré, but Josquin Dupré recognizes that. And so he composes this out in the horizontalization of the C chord, right? But how does he get to the C? He gets to the C by way of moving through A, right? And he uses this motion to get to the C. Yes? Every single movement of this mass begins with this horizontalization, so that the C major section, which is the predominant prolongation, is embedded inside of a large scale A sonority. And then, surprisingly, at the very end, you'll see what happens. Now, there are other things that happen in this Kyrie that we'll talk about. Let's play it again from the beginning and listen. Okay, this first section ends on what?
G.
Right, so it goes A, then to C, and then finally it cadences on G. All right, let's go to the Christe.
It's a great B flat in
There's a ficta in it.
there.
Yeah. So what is this?
Yes.
Starts over with what?
Do.
Do, right? So this is the idea that Palestrina latched onto, and that is very evident and worked out pretty much in detail by Josquin de Prez. That you could join sections of pieces of music or a larger unit by relating the sections in a fifth movement. So this particular section has a fifth relationship to the preceding section. So it actually returns to C, do, sol, and then do. All right? This is the Christe. So in relationship to the C, which began this, right, section, where are we now? Yeah, it moves to re, okay? Now, if he's true to form, the beginning of the closing section, or the repeat of the Kyrie, could do one of many things. But what do you think he will do? If this is ending on a re, then he's probably going to start this last section on
Sol?
so, probably. I don't know. I've never heard this piece before. Okay?
It's minor, so.
Wow. Something happened. This must be a different recording session. Let's do it once again. All right. So, on a large scale, if we look at these three sections, we have the C major or the Do major chord being expanded, right? So it goes actually Do to Sol, and then the second section begins back on Do, and then that whole thing moves up to D or Re. And then the third section starts on G and moves back to C. So you have this pattern, Do, Re, Sol, Do, that's there, okay? Last section. You got that? All right, stop it. Two things. You heard a sequence, right, which goes back or to the do chord, and then you have these repetitions, right, in the bass, which is what? What's the bass line? Yeah, do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do, re, mi. But the mi is set as a what? As a C6-3? It's an E minor triad,
It
isn't
is.
it? Okay. Same thing, substitute. All right, play this section again. Wow. Okay.
That's brilliant.
Okay, so that's how it gets back to the E, right? In the Phrygian mode, it's complete fakery. You don't hear this in E minor. At least I don't hear that. I don't think you do. How does it get back to the E?
Very last segment. 6/5.
Do, la, mi. Isn't that what happens?
Yeah.
Do, re, mi, do, re, mi, do, re, mi, and ba, ba, ba. Do, mi, do, la, mi. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, something has happened to music. And what would you say that's happened?
We finally figured out
Schoenberg.
what sounds good.
What?
We finally figured out what sounds better.
Well, it sounds better. Why?
Regularity of rhythm.
Well, a clarification of rhythmic, the more alignment between the parts.
More prolongations.
Yes, the prolongations become more aligned, right? And so the regulation of consonants and dissonance in terms of vertical sonority is even more precise. And it yields immediately, right, larger sections within a single chord, prolonged. Not dissimilar to this counterpoint exercise. Right, okay. Now there's another really remarkable section in this mass that we have to listen to, and that is the setting of the Et Incarnatus. And it's in the B, and it's at 10.29 into the report, or 28, something like that. Now, we're changing to, this is notated in Do, but it's going to be in some kind of a B major.
Oh,
So
are we
try to
moving along?
adjust your ear.
So let me get to the thing.
Oh, no, wait a minute, wait, stop.
Where does this go?
All right.
It's
Yeah.
This is one of the most famous passages in all of Renaissance music.
On there.
But don't follow along. It's right here.
This is,
Oh. Looks like everyone else is following along.
It's at the bottom of the page 11, what it says, right?
Oh.
Bottom of the page. Et incarnatus est. Crank up the volume just a little bit, please. All right, now here we go. All right, now wait a minute. That's easy to hear. Right, adjust your ear. Don't think about anything. Okay, so it's B major, right? Right? I can't look at this. Okay? And then it goes down to G sharp, right? Right? And then it goes up to what?
C sharp.
C sharp with an A sharp, right? And that's how it gets back to B, right? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. makes
Okay,
sense.
all right. Let's start again. What is that? Isn't that a repetition? But this time moving to, yes. All right, so the basic motion from the B is G, C sharp, F sharp, right? So it's moving down a fourth. Si, sol, fa, fa, sol, si, do, re, do. Not him. Okay, never mind. Okay? Got it?
Yes.
Do it again from the beginning. All right, wait a minute. What does it do there? Beginning on F sharp, it goes to what? It goes from the F sharp to Do sharp, then what?
La sharp to C.
Sol, la, si.
So, right? Let's listen to it one more time. That phrase. Then E. There's a delay. Okay, stop that. Right, they do something very strange. Instead of factus est, they take the S out. Right, why do you think they do that? Do you hear that? This is the Clement Yannickin group.
So it's connecting.
Right, to connect it without an interruption. Yeah? Right, and let's play the whole thing one more time. What does the text say? Et incarnatus est. What is that?
And
Okay,
it was
so
made incarnate.
incarnation is-
Was made incarnate. What does incarnate mean? What is carnal knowledge? Flash, right? Okay? De Spiritu Sancto.
Flash of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Out of the Virgin
And
Mary.
was- And the Holy Spirit,
Out of the Virgin Mary.
Virgin Mary, yes. And became man and was made man. So God becomes man via the Virgin Mary. Yes? Okay. And what is the text of the Panjalingua? Anybody know?
The what?
Panjalingua Gloriosa.
We sing it every
Gloriosi
year.
corporis
Yes.
mysterium.
Say what?
Pange lingua gloriosi corporis mysterium.
Yeah,
Give
what
us
does that
some
say?
English.
It's, Of the glorious body telling.
Are you on Google Translate?
No.
Pange Lingua.
Sing my tongue the Savior's glory.
Yes. Sing my tongue. Keep going. Sing my tongue, the Savior.
Savior's glory. Of his flesh the mystery sing. Of the blood all price exceeding. Shed by our immortal King. Destined for the world's redemption. From a noble womb to spring.
Okay. All right.
There's also a literal rendering right next to the translation.
How about no?
It's all time in the
That's
mystery.
it. That's it. That's it. Well, isn't this peculiar for something that's supposed to be polyphonic? This is polyphonic.
Yeah,
It's just
why?
that all the voices are moving together simultaneously. It's a startling effect, and it's what is generally referred to as the familiar style. Now, musicologists have pulled their hair out trying to figure out what is the precise definition of the familiar style. but it's generally associated with a style where everything is moving vertically at the same time. And apparently one of the ideas is that the text could be called attention to by having every voice sing the same syllable at the same time. Sometimes there are passages in madrigals where you'll get this kind of style. Here it appears in a mass. Where does this actually come from? Anybody know? Searching back through your music history?
What, homophony?
Well, you can describe it that way. But it's obviously like that. It's polyphonic. What is the frotilla?
The what?
Do you know what a frotilla is? Okay, maybe we should look at that.
It was like an early form of something or other, I don't remember.
Oh my god, this.
The frotilla is a syllabic setting of a secular text, right? And it's all in root position chords,
Nice.
because it's easy to play on the guitar or the lute, right?
It's like Morrison Ferguson.
The first chapter, Morrison Ferguson without the accidentals, yes. Or like a watering down of the accidentals. Who were the early frotillists?
Oh, we were taught this. I'm remembering.
Marquette O'Cara?
Carr was also a madrigalist. Yes. What's the famous one?
Bartolomeo Tromboncino?
Yes, Tromboncino. Right? Leave it to him to have a name of a brass instrument. Okay?
And a bad one at that.
Okay? All right, now, does the Pondulingua tune appear in this little et incarnatus est thing?
Let me check.
No, don't check.
At the beginning?
Yes, the whole thing is a setting of the first phrase of the Pondulingua melody. It's transformed in the soprano. It's the most remarkable thing. Let's listen to this example one more time. And you can look at the music now. Fantastic. All right, that's the end. All right. Now, let us go to, how many of you read the Hickey? Did you read the Hickey? Nobody read it. You didn't read it? Well, I'm not going to discuss it then. Okay. I did want to, I had written down a quote somewhere I wanted to read you. We'll go to the Siddhartha. I meant to read this before when we were discussing what we were discussing. This is a quote from Wittgenstein. The final elegance, asking the question, no answers, no explanations. Why do you demand explanations? If they are given, you will once more be facing a terminus. So, we opt for descriptions. not mere explanations. It's the quality of the explanations and how they fit the descriptions. Okay, I don't want to do this. I want to do the Siddhartha. That's much more revealing. You have read the Siddhartha, yes? All right, let's go to amongst the people. All right. So he's met Kamala, and he has met Kamaswami, and Kamaswami has hired him or allowed him to be his assistant because he could read and write. You know? And this chapter tells you about Siddhartha's relationship with people in the world. Let's look at page 52. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. What do you think about this chapter? What goes on in here? And what do you think?
Well, something.
Was this where he's doing the business dealings?
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll read here.
So he just doesn't have skin in the game at
What?
first, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the idea? He doesn't have skin in the game at first.
He
Like,
doesn't have
doesn't-
skin?
Skin in the game. Okay, he doesn't have a personal interest in like getting the deal, like his boss. Isn't that the idea here? Eventually, he gets that way.
Maybe. I possess nothing, said Siddhartha, if that's what you mean. I'm certainly without possessions, but on my own free will, so I'm not in need. But how will you live if you are without possessions? I've never thought about it, sir. I've been without possessions for nearly 3 years, and I've never thought on what I should live. So you've lived on the possessions of others. Apparently, the merchant also lives on the possessions of others. Well spoken. But he does not take from others for nothing. He gives his good in exchange. That seems to be the way of things. Everyone takes, everyone gives. Life is like that. Everyone gives what he has. The soldier gives strength, the merchant goods, the teacher instruction, the farmer rice, the fisherman fish, blah, blah, blah. Very well, and what can you give? What have you learned that you can give? Can think, wait, and fast. So it's found out that he can read and write, so he's hired. Okay. And so down at the bottom of page 53, it says, he was never servile to the merchant, but compelled him to treat him as an equal, and even more than his equal. Kamaswami conducted his business with care and often with passion, but Siddhartha regarded it all as a game, the rules of which he endeavored to learn well, but which did not stir his heart. The idea of the game is one of the reasons why I wanted you to read the Hickey essay that revolves around the game of basketball. It's an incredible essay. Please read it. The Heresy of Zone Defense. It's an amazing little essay, and it touches, of course, on a topic that I obsess about all the time.
Zone defense?
Rule following.
Oh.
Right?
I thought you were gonna say you were more of a man-to-man kind of person.
I am. Right? That's what the idea behind the zone defense is. Right? The heresy of zone defense. You like basketball?
I know next to nothing about it, but I used to play it.
Hey, I saw a game last night. First time in years. It was on the TV.
The only broken finger I ever had was playing 101 with my cousin in the second floor of the horse barn of his brother. Can you imagine that? Right. I was about 10 years old. I know nothing about basketball, and I'm not a big sports fan. But it's an interesting game. Far more interesting than, I think, football. Although the football players would question that. Those that are not suffering from irreversible concussions. Okay. All right, on page 54. Hey, how about that? All right. He was not long in Kamaswami's house when he was already taking part in his master's business. Daily, however, at the hour she invited him, he visited the beautiful Kamala in handsome clothes, in fine shoes, and soon he also brought her presents. He learned many things from her wise red lips. Her smooth, gentle hand taught him many things. He who was still a boy as regards love, and was inclined to plunge to the depths of it blindly and insatiably, was taught by her that one cannot have pleasure without giving it. And in every gesture, every caress, every touch, every glance, every single part of the body has its secret, which can give pleasure to one who can understand. She taught him that lovers should not separate from one another after making love without admiring each other, without being conquered as well as conquering, so that no feeling of cessation or desolation arises, nor the horrid feeling of misusing or having been misused. Now you see why some people think that this book should be like read in high schools, thinking that it might impart some kind of moral rectitude on the raging whatever. Right? I think not. I think this is about a totally different thing. Right? Yes, it's about sensual pleasure, but it's also about, human relationships and about the notion of what the sexuality brings into a relationship. And I think it's far more than the sensual relationship itself. And he says it right here, right? Without admiring each other, we should admire each other, without being conquered as well as conquering, so that no feeling of cessation or dissolution arises, nor the hard feeling of misusing or having been misused. He spent wonderful hours with the clever, beautiful courtesan and became her pupil, her lover and friend. Here with Kamala lay the value and meaning of his present life, not in Kamaswami's business. Well, not currently. And then it goes on to say, what is the nature of success? But he has the secret of those people to whom success comes by itself, whether it is due to being born under a lucky star, or whether it is magic, or whether he has earned it from the samanas. He always seems to be playing at business. It never makes much impression on him. It never masters him, never fears failure. He never fears failure. He is never worried about a loss. All right, going on. So what is this chapter? How does this chapter end?
Siddhartha is really depressed and finds himself in trouble.
Yeah. Well, there is a dilemma emerging, is there not? At the end, page 58 of this chapter. He was leading a strange life, that he was doing many things that were only a game, that he was quite cheerful and sometimes experienced pleasure, but that real life was flowing past him and did not touch him. Like a player who plays with his ball, he played with his business, with the people around him. Skipping a little bit. His real self wandered elsewhere, far away, wandered on and on invisibly, and had nothing to do with his life. Further down, he visited the beautiful Kamala regularly, learned the art of love in which more than anything else, giving and taking became one. Now, the total point is in the next paragraph. Once he said to her, "You are like me. You are different from other people. You are Kamala and no one else. And within you there is a stillness and sanctuary to which you can retreat at any time and be yourself. just as I can. Few people have that capacity, and yet everyone could have it. Not all people are clever, said Kamala. It has nothing to do with cleverness, Kamala, said Siddhartha. Kamaswami is just as clever as I am, and yet he has no sanctuary. Others have it who are only children in understanding. Most people, Kamala, are like a falling leaf that drifts and turns in the air, flutters and falls to the ground. But a few others are like stars, which travel one defined path. No wind reaches them. They have within themselves their guide and path. Among all the wise men, of whom I know many, there was one who was perfect in this respect. I can never forget him. One who preaches this gospel. Thousands of young men hear his teachings every day and follow his instructions every hour. And they are all falling leaves. They have not the wisdom and guide within themselves. All right, so once again, he's reiterating the fact that, whatever kind of transformation and whatever this concept of sanctuary is, it's not something that comes from the outside. Yeah? Okay, well, how does this connect with the next chapter? Samsara. What is that?
The reawakening.
Hesse says that it's a game that children play. I don't think so. I don't know why he would say that. Do you? What is actually the definition of samsara in Hindu philosophy, or in Buddhist philosophy for that matter? Anybody know?
Checking. The cycle of death and rebirth to which life in the material world is bound.
The cycle of what?
Death and rebirth to which life in the material world is bound.
Right. So, life and death to which the material world is bound. So why would Hesse call that a game that children play? Does he really mean? I don't know what the original German says, but I'm sure.
I've got it
Ross
here in
was-
front of me.
What?
I've got it here in front of me.
Does
I
it
just
say
don't know where
anything
to
like
start.
that? But the Rosser translation is pretty accurate, with Hesse's approval. But he does say that samsara is a game that children play. Doesn't he say that? Yeah, it does. I don't know where it says it.
I mean,
He does say
means
it.
children
He
is
does
like
say- he says-
child's play.
Yeah. Yeah, but what sense? Samsara, if it really means the cycle, unending cycle of birth and death in the material world, in the material sense, what does that mean? You do something and you figure out, I wish I could quit doing this. So you stop. And then you say, I've got to do that again. And it starts over again. Right? And then you come to the conclusion, I have to stop. And then you stop for a while and then you figure out you have to do this over and over again. So what is that like?
The American education system.
Perhaps.
I'm thinking of childhood games, I don't.
No, well, that's an image. It doesn't really specifically relate to children, I
No,
don't
it
think.
had more to do with simplicity and shallowness.
Yes, it's a childlike behavior, right? Doing things over and over and over again, right? And, maybe things that are not really good for you. And you keep doing them over and over again. Somehow you're drawn to them. That's the definition of a what?
Addiction? An idiot.
Yeah, yeah, well, if that's the case, there are plenty of idiots roaming around, right?
According to Einstein, isn't that insanity?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, sometimes it's it's referred to as an insane behavior. It's doing the same thing over and over again and what? Expecting something different results. Yeah, okay. All right. Now
Makes me wonder why I practice.
I've read that.
Really?
Well, that's how we could tie it to music, actually. Is practicing doing the same thing over and over again?
Hopefully not.
It better not be. It shouldn't be, right? Okay. Well, that's the lesson of learning how to practice. It's like looking at a fish tank. Practicing is like looking at a fish tank.
In what way?
Hopefully you'll notice different stuff every time.
Well, you walk around the fish tank and you see the fish, presumably if it's in the same position, from a different angle. If someone, if the carp is there and it's like frozen in time, and you're on this side of the fish tank and someone says, describe the fish, you'll say blah, 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 X, Y, Z. And then someone says, different, go to the end of the tank, and you see the tail or whatever, the head, and you describe the fish and you have a completely different view, and so forth and so on. Practicing should be like that, right? You're looking at the same object from different perspectives. And the different perspectives, right, add up to some global property. But it takes all of those properties to inform you about the particular object. That is practicing, like a fish tank.
Every now and again you have to clean off the algae deposits.
Well, hopefully not. We leave that to somebody else. We leave that to the critics or the judges, whatever, right? Which are nonsense.
I would not trust them to deal with my algae.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't trust them with anything. Right, so this is a description of a habitual behavior, right? The pursuit of pleasure or desire, right? That is what is meant by that. And it can be translated in a very extreme way as some kind of compulsive or addictive behavior, right? Does Siddhartha's relationship with Kamala become like an addiction or habitual patternistic behavior? Right. Page 64. He won thousands. This is where he's like basically gotten into gambling. That's another thing, right? He won thousands, threw thousands away, lost money, lost jewels, lost a country house, won again and lost again. He loved that anxiety, that terrible and oppressive anxiety which he experienced to the game of dice. After every great loss, he devoted himself to the procurement of new riches, went eagerly after business and pressed his debtors for payment, for he wanted to play again. He wanted to squander again. And in the next page, he says something very, very odd, but it's very interesting, I think, and I think it bears on the use of a specific word. Middle of the page. Never had it been so strangely clear to Siddhartha how closely related passion was to death. What does he mean by that? He says, one day, perhaps soon, I will also become a follower of this Buddha, Kamala, right? I will give him my pleasure garden and take refuge in his teachings. But then she enticed him, and in love play, she clasped him to her with extreme fervor, fiercely and tearfully, as if she wanted once more to extract the last drop from his fleeting pleasure. Never had it been so strangely clear to Siddhartha how closely related passion was to death. Now it's a little better context. Then he lay beside her, and Kamala's face was near to his, and under her eyes and near the corners of her mouth he read clearly for the first time a sad sign, fine lines and wrinkles, a sign which gave a reminder of autumn and old age. Who's doing in the last orchestra concert, isn't somebody conducting the Strauss last song, four last songs?
Karina Kanalakis.
Isn't there a song called September?
Yes.
Anyone know the text of that? Actually, those last songs, who's the poetry by? Or some of them?
Is it
Hesse.
Hesse?
Hesse. The September poem is related to this idea precisely.
Songs are
Is it
spring,
related to
September.
the whole idea in Rosenkavalier as well?
Yes. Yes. It's a perpetual, actually, idea in Strauss. And what's his name? Rosenthal. No. What is the librettist?
Hoffman.
Hofmannsthal, not Rosenthal. Hofmannsthal. Right. So what does this mean? Passion and death. Why is it so closely related?
It's both come with the same fears.
What?
Both come with like the same fears, fear of loss.
Yeah, I think that's pretty perceptive. The passion of Christ. What is that? Is that the same use of the word passion? The Passion of Jonathan Wade. You know that opera? Is it
Like
Samuel Barber or is
suffering.
it Carlisle Floyd? It might be Carlisle Floyd. The Passion of Jonathan Wade.
Excuse me.
All right.
It's
Well, we shall end there today.
Carlisle Floyd,
Yeah.
who was both composer and librettist.
Yes. What's his other opera that was famous? Susanna. Yeah. Susanna's an interesting piece. You have to have microphones for the singers. There's 75 brass instruments. Okay. All right. Well, in the next class, we're going to move on to Mantovani. No, Monteverdi, right? And we will try to finish up the Siddhartha, and I would really like to do the Zondervanz thing, right? Because it's a fascinating essay. Please read that. And thank you for your participation today, and have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.